We have founded a company because we have a heavy emphasis on cybersecurity at our university. We founded a company, a young team of researchers, another colleague of mine, Andreas, and myself, almost 6 years ago, dealing in cybersecurity for automated systems and embedded systems, basically OT technology. Prior to that, I was, among other positions, CTO to Belden and Hirschman, and this is where I got to know the topic of cybersecurity in heavily networked environments in the area of automation and embedded systems, and I basically took that topic with me. So we do product audits, among other things, and that's where we got to know Secomea. Actually, during my Hirschman time, I've already worked with Peter, so we had a relationship. And so Secomea was our first and key customer and has been a good and dear customer to ours since then. And we have worked together on a number of projects with respect to cybersecurity.
Thank you very much. So if we go back to the topic of today, we have an agenda here which sort of escapes the format. Format of the discussion would be that I have prepared some questions for Peter Froehlich to lead us into the matter. And the questions are mainly derived from my discussions with customers and my observations on trends in the market. Especially in my position as CTO, I would very much like to predict the future, so I can make products that matches the future. Second best would be to have some kind of solid indicators, and I hope that Peter Froehlich can provide some hints, and I hope it will inspire the participants here to enter the dialogue in the Q&A session at the end. We will remain muted during the questions, but if you have if you as participants have questions during the following, do not hesitate to write a message in the comments in Teams, and I'll keep an eye out for it. So what I'll do here is I'll unshare my screen again, and shoot off the questions, because I trust that Peter has some stuff that he would like to bring up during the conversations here. My first questions is the ProtectEM's general outlook on automation security landscape. ProtectEM provides cybersecurity guidance and solutions in the areas of industrial operations, industrial automation, machine building, manufacturing, energy generation, and so forth. Distribution, even automotive and embedded systems, as I understand it. But what commonalities do you see in the cybersecurity landscape trending now, such as biggest concern, largest technical challenge, etc.?
Yes, thank you very much. First of all, can you see my screen and the agenda slide now? Do I share that?
Yes.
Yep.
You can. That's good.
Excellent.
Oops, no, something happened. We're back. Okay. Well, cybersecurity, it has been an amazing roller coaster ride for the past few years, because when Peter and I started to deal with cybersecurity, it was like everybody said, well, this is really, really important. We need this. But, well, we don't really know what to do about it, so we'll just wait and see. And so every year when you know, SPS IPC drives, for example, an important automation show in Europe. So when we talked to automation vendors, they said, first, yeah, it's really interesting, hot topic. We know we need to do something. Next year was, actually, we have a plan now and we have a budget for next year. We will do something concrete about it. And the year later, it was they had hired someone to actually take on the responsibility. This has really dramatically changed now. I think cybersecurity is one of the prime topics that carries the entire industry. What's really still interesting is that while a lot of people talk about cybersecurity, they mainly think about standard IT systems, and the specifics of our automation world is still neglected by a lot of people, are not finally seen. However, cybersecurity will have a big impact and already has a big impact on the industry and how the industry works. Let's look at Secomea. Secomea is one of the earliest companies to really embrace cybersecurity and take that very seriously, which is good because Secomea is in the space of remote maintenance and their security really counts and matters. But security has to be viewed from an end-to-end perspective. So it starts with the automation vendor. It's then mainly the machine builder, the machine vendor, the people who create systems, and then it's the end users. And what's really interesting about cybersecurity in that space is that the entire value chain has to be closed. So you really have to look at cybersecurity from an end-to-end perspective, starting with the components, the system, but also the use of the system. And when we talk to machine builders, when we talk to end customers and do risk analyses and audits, everybody looks at technology. How do we need to set up our network? Do we need a better firewall? Yet 80% or maybe 70% of the actions that need to be done are more in the area of processes and procedures and how do you deal with things, and the entire value chain end to end has to be closed. And why I think this has such a big impact is that we will need the same responsibility that Microsoft now gives us for free, in quotes, when they do a monthly cyber security or an update to their Windows platform. Basically, the same thing needs to happen in our industry. So we need to make sure that a system is secure today, and tomorrow there is some problem, some vulnerability that becomes public, and then tomorrow this needs to be fixed. So we basically need a closed value chain and a service chain and a maintenance chain between automation component vendor, machine builder, and end user. And basically this costs money. And if we have a machine that's out there for 10, 15, 20 years, that will have to be maintained for this entire life cycle. And any vulnerability has to be fixed, which is a real challenge because we're not generally used to paying money for that kind of service. And we need this engagement and this continuous business model. I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Peter.
That leads me, I think you've already led yourself into the next questions here. Is Secomea's position when OT and IT responsibilities converge. And we can see from our perspective that OT departments has been identifying and deciding remote maintenance solutions and just seeking acceptance from the IT. So how do you experience the roles between OT and IT today and tomorrow in respect to remote maintenance by third parties?
Yeah, as I briefly told you, I was once responsible at Hirschmann Automation for their and Belden for their technology platform. And it was the funniest thing. We often got called to customers where there was basically a battle between the IT department and the production department, because IT said, we need to move forward security now. And they would install a huge Cisco or some other model firewall and say, well, this is now IT managed, and we now make sure that your production systems don't, make our entire IT landscape vulnerable. And usually it would take like 2 or 3 days until the production manager, when they had the first shutdown in their production, because the firewall basically on the first suspicion shut down system. So these firewalls didn't last very long in production. And then often these people came to us and said, well, do you have an OT firewall that helps us in that space? And this is when, people realize that between an OT, a production system, and between a regular office IT system, there is severe or significant differences in the motivation and the target, and also in the security objectives. And because of that, it is actually necessary to alter the systems. Not necessarily do we need different technologies, but a firewall that is well configured in the IT space, it has to act on first suspicion, because the danger here is a secret getting out. And if the secret is out, there's only one attempt. If it's out, it's out. You can't get it back. So the firewall needs to basically shut down on first suspicion, whereas in the OT world, we need to have systems reliably running and continue to run. So we need a different configuration and a different setup of the firewall. And this is why a remote maintenance system or let's say a remote access system used in the standard IT world doesn't really fulfill the job description in the OT world. And I think, Peter, you guys have concentrated on OT and on machine services. And just one example, the hierarchical structure where you have basically a system vendor, you have sometimes even a system integrator, then you have the user. So there's different scopes and perspectives and a whole hierarchy of scopes that people have to look at, and that needs to be reflected in the maintenance and in the setup of such a system.
Yeah, when you talk about hierarchies, that brings me to the question about relevance of the Industry 4.0 model, because it's very much about that. The remote architecture model Industry 4.0, also known as the RAMI 40, refer to a number of IEC and ISO standards specific to security and safety, configuration, lifecycle, etc. Which of these standards would you advise OT to be most observant about in relation to remote maintenance? And how does this Secomea solution specifically align with that? That's one of my key questions. I have to get some answers on.
Sure. Well, thanks for asking, Peter. One thing that basically we discussed a few years ago is how does the Secomea product and product landscape actually fit into this model. Now, if you look at the model, and I hope you can all see this reference model, a lot of people have mistaken or misunderstood what this model is, because basically it's just a reference model in the sense of it shows where things are and it shows the different perspectives. We have on the bottom the product, field device, control device. So that's the traditional automation pyramid or hierarchy. Then you have the layers, basically the stories in the building, business functional information. That's more the different aspects, the perspectives that you can look at. Are we talking about business processes or are we talking about control processes? And then from left back to upper or front right, that's the value chain. That's the product life cycle from creation of a product to instantiation and usage of the product. And so when we look at this Industry 4.0 model, we can now say, where does the Secomea solution sit, for example? And it sits certainly across the entire product hierarchy from product, field device, control device, but also it can be used for specific levels of the business functionality. So basically, this reference model is not a ready architecture where you can say I can implement the RAMI model, but it's rather a way that we bridge the communication between IT and OT. What we just said, this gap between communications between IT and OT people, this can be bridged, and we can basically locate where are the value chains, what is the focus. And when we now look at digitalization models where we want to integrate a number of things, different processes, value chain processes, but also different vendors across the entire life cycle of the product, then this model helps us to find where things are.
But what about the standards? Because when you look at the RAMI 4.0 model, there's a ton of standards, IEC standards of various kinds, ISO and so forth. So I was more, is there anywhere particular that you should put your focus on?
Yeah, let me quickly pull that up. I lost the model somewhere. No, it's there. Just a second.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah, right. So that's a model that is, you gave me that reference. I don't want to, it's referenced from I40 semantic interoperability.org that you also quoted in your your questions. I think that's a great composition of all the standards that are relevant. And if you look at the top, we see here the IEC 62443. That's our reference framework, and it sits next to the ISO 20000. The ISO 20000 is the framework for security in all general terms, information or information security management systems, all that. And a lot of companies are ISO 20000 certified. However, that covers from a perspective only the IT side. It doesn't really cover the specifics of the OT side. And so the IEC 62443 is not in competition, but it's rather looking at the security aspects from a different angle, from that angle of automation systems. And so the two really go hand in hand. And while you look for the office systems more at the 27,000, the wording in the IEC 62443 is more for the production and automation people, but the targets and the means of doing things are basically the same, only with that different focus. So to me, these are, when we look at security, basically the governing frameworks. Then we find a number of, and then we find on the right side, we find everything that has to do with safety. So the interesting thing about safety is, as I earlier talked about the business process, safety, you only have to evaluate once. When you do a risk assessment for a system, that is then safe, and you have assessed the risk because you think that there is going to be a component fault or something like that. However, security, this assessment has to be done over and over again. It's a continuous process to reassess the security space, because a system that is secure today can be rendered totally unsecure tomorrow because some vulnerability appears. And we know, and we've heard about that with Adobe, with Microsoft, with all the big players. That's basically the same thing for the automation side. So these two go hand in hand. They have very similar aspects like risk workshops and risk assessments, but the way we do things is still a little different between the two. Both in Germany, the word is Sicherheit, that comprises both security and safety. So for us, it's easy. We just say safe and then or secure. We say sicher, and then it has to fulfill both. There is, I can't, and I don't even know all these standards. There is a number of, let's say, factory models, and I know there's, for example, for the food industry, there's a whole logic and object model of and a semantic model of how do structures go together. There's other models like automation ML and so on. So basically ontologies that lets us describe all the things that we have in a factory. You guys at Secomea basically took a generic approach because you said we have the means in our tools basically to model those hierarchies, so we can set up plants or we can set up individual production cells, and that then becomes the scope for administrating remote maintenance. But there's obviously tons of standards that are basically domain specific, and I really can't talk about these because I don't know them all. We see some in projects specifically. What is really an enabler to me is this one here, OPC UA. Because to my understanding, this OPC UA as the generic and powerful, capable means of secure communications with rich information, with a rich information model capable of modeling all these different ontologies and structures and all the services, real-time, non-real-time, all of that is included in OPC UA, and it has become basically the Internet of Things carrier in the automation world. I know it's kind of competing with MQTT, which is typically say US based, but also widely accepted standard. MQTT is not quite as rich in terms of its information model, its security model, the real-time model. It's very easy to implement and therefore widespread. But I think, and that's also my perception when we look at MES systems, at interfaces in typical PLC systems today, everybody now supports OPC UA because it's such a rich interface. And no matter where we do projects in whatever domain, OPC UA, everybody says this is the standard we're going to embrace. And so we also kind of focus when we deal with security on establishing OPC UA as our Industry 4.0 digital communication model, and use the security mechanisms that are robust, that are part of OPC UA.
We got a question here from the audience, which is quite relevant. Now we know the IEC 62443 embraces both the product and the processes in two different standards tracks of it. But there are also, you have them there. And in these, you have some levels. What is the role of the security level achieved by specific products? So, and what would you aim at?
Right.
Being compliant to?
Actually, this is a really good question. And maybe if it's okay, I will just briefly touch on the IEC 62443 as such. It starts at the bottom with the. Can I point this?
Yeah.
It's really hard because well, anyway, here I'm moving out of the screen. So at the bottom we have the component layer.
The pink one.
Yeah, the pink one. The pink one. So, but I talked about this value chain. I said we have basically three groups. We have the component vendor, we have the system builder, and then we have the end user. And that's basically the bottom three layers. The pink layer, that's the component layer, and it has on the right side this part 4.2. This is the product side. So when we do a product audit, for example, with the Secomea product, we look at 4.2 because it's not only a single component, but it's actually a system. We also looked at the next layer, which is the 3.3 standard. Basically, also it looks at product, but it looks at complex system products that have a connectivity network inside and so on. And the level 4.1, this is the development process. And that's like safety. In the old days, it was the TÜV in Germany who came and said, give us the product, ship the product to us, and we will assess if it's safe. Today, this has really changed because we know we can't actually, if we just look at the product, we will never know if it's really safe. So we have to look at the design process. And that is what the safety industry has moved towards. They say we review and audit the processes, and then also the product, but we need to make sure the processes are in place. And it's the same level here. So 4.1 is the design processes, and 4.2 is the the product itself. So that's the component level. Then the yellow, brownish yellow level, that's the system level. So that has to do with connected products, as I said, and also it talks about how do we do a risk analysis for an entire machine or a bigger system. And then the green level, that contains a lot of processes. How do we deal with vendors? What do we do with training personnel that comes for maintenance? How do we do security for them? All of that. And
within each of these these standards, you also have some levels of compliance, right? Depending on how harsh you want to build your products or your processes, right? It's
exactly.
From 1 to 4 or something like that. Do you see any trend there in the market that you should be compliant to level 2 at least, or 2.5?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So if we look at the standard, this would basically an implementation of one perspective of the RAMI model, which is the value chain, the different vendors and their roles in the process. And as I said, end to end, the chain has to be closed around all these levels. And level 1 is basically just terms and general concepts. And then within this entire set, another dimension that is not shown here are what they call foundational requirements. So these are the different aspects of security. For example, user authentication, login, passwords. How do you identify a user? Communication. How do we make sure communication between systems is not manipulated. So this is about integrity. Not having integrity would be a nightmare. You would be producing green cars instead of red cars, which would be easily noticeable. But if you like had a quality defect in your product and you wouldn't notice because of an integrity problem, that would be a real big issue. And then within those foundational requirements, we have now the security levels, and that's like the safety levels, the SIL that we know from the safety industry, from machine safety. And here we also have 4 levels, 1, 2, 3, 4. They look similar, but they are a little different. The way these are crafted, the security level 1 is basically something happens by pure accident. So that should be, that should never happen. By pure accident, the systems should work. And usually you have level 1 functionality by just making sure your machine or your system, your product is okay and runs. Then level 2 is there is some intent, it's targeted, but it doesn't really need huge competency or huge knowledge. It's something that, an average network educated person can actually achieve. And then the level 3 and 4, that means we really have criminal intent. There's a lot of motivation that's necessary. It needs a lot of expertise to do the hacking. And level 4 is basically state level actors. We will not get there because all of us who are on the call are not willing to pay for that level of security. Okay. It's just not achievable. It's not realistic. If we talk about station level actors,
it's a vision kind of.
Yeah, well, it's a level of Stuxnet where millions have been invested into creating a targeted attack targeted at one specific system, as there's just no way we can defend against that. And level 3, today, I don't think anybody can reach level 3 across the board, which also has to do with this end-to-end perspective, because it's also costly to the end customer. Not costly necessarily only in terms of pricing, but also in terms of process, usability. How easy is it to deal with a product like that? If you have 2-factor authentication, for example, which would be required for level 3, that means the user can't just log in with a password, but they also need a second device, a mobile phone, something else for a login, so that you have this 2-factor authentication, which is now standard with our standard mobile phones, but it's not standard in the automation domain. And there's other things that make it really difficult to achieve level 3 across the board.
So what I hear you're saying is really that aim for level 2 and then pick some of the elements of level 3.
Absolutely.
That would be realistic for an OT perspective.
Now, the way we go about it with machine vendors, because the nice thing is, like Secomea, you can only make your system secure, but you don't know the application. The same system can be used in, I don't know, running a printer repair shop, which is, let's say, low risk, and it could also run a nuclear plant or a chemical process plant or something. So the damage impact, the risk impact is quite different.
That's funny you should mention. We just had a question from the audience: how to secure from internal threat. And I also understand that that's really part of it. You have to also secure it from internal, but there should be some kind of trust. So where do you balance that? Stuxnet really came from the inside, as far as I was informed about it, although it was created outside.
Yes. Yeah, Gaurav, thank you for that question. As I said earlier, 70% is really not in the technology, but is in the processes. We had a large data center as a customer, or we still have them as customer, but their biggest impact that ever happened, their biggest accident was the night guard switching off an important system. It was basically a secondary system, a climate control system, but that person could shut off the climate control system, and subsequently all the servers would shut down. That is something that nobody had ever thought of. It was not malicious intent. That guy was not well educated. he saw something blinking or some, I don't know, whatever. So just switch the flip the switch. So the way we go about it is really do a security assessment where we look at the damages that can happen, the risks, but also the possible threats, and will I notice it? That is really an important aspect of that. And the outcome then is basically a risk report, a risk assessment, and then that can be then, or the actions that you take from there is really look at the detailed threat and say, okay, for this specific threat, we have a high exposure that is to our application very critical. So let's achieve for some level 3 measures that can actually prevent that specific threat from happening. So rather than saying, I go to level 3 across the board and I demand that from all of my component suppliers, which is basically just too costly. But it's also not efficient. It's much more efficient to say, here I have specific exposures and I go for specific features and I use level 3 or level 2. And this is why this IEC 62443 has these foundational requirements. So it breaks down into a number of different aspects, and you don't have to fulfill level 3 or level 2 across the board. You can actually differentiate and go into specific features. For Secomea, sorry, just last sentence, sorry for talking. Last sentence. For Secomea, we have chosen to go to level 2 across the board. And that's what our audit is, although some features are actually level 3, but the minimum requirement is level 2, because we don't know what's going to be done with that. Level 1 is really not worth it, so I wouldn't target for level 1. Not efficient.
What I would like to do now is to switch topic a little bit, because we could talk all night about the IEC standards here. So I have these questions here. What standards have most future relevance? Are multinational cloud vendors to be trusted as OT platforms? That's what we hear a lot. Ability for large customers to be independent of cloud services maintained by third parties. And we have been known to offer customers the ability to host things internally, but still maybe decided to host the server, such as our gateway in a cloud. What is your experience for larger customers? Have they accepted these multinational cloud platforms such as Azure and Amazon and so forth as hosting platforms for the OT infrastructure?
Yeah, I can only talk about my experience. I don't have a I don't have a final word on that. But the vendors that we are working with and have worked with during especially the last 2 years, very typical project has been, we're now doing an enhanced machine cloud structure that communicates data to the cloud. So we send I/O data, sensor data into the cloud for later processing, for easy access, for data aggregation, and so on. And so far, the accepted level or the accepted boundary has been that everybody says, we actually trust Microsoft to get the Azure systems as a mechanical system, basically as a foundation, like a hard disk. We trust Microsoft to get that secure, and Google and Amazon and all the others. And it's really all of these big systems are being utilized, and they're more or less, from the view at least of our customer and also our own view, they are more or less interchangeable. They provide a solid foundation for storing data, for redundancy, for encrypted communication services, and so on. So what we have concentrated on really is the interfaces, the apps, and especially the gateways. So how does the information transition from the machine, from the protected environment of the user? How does that transition into the cloud? And how does it how is the access to the cloud? What is the browser client? How do I get the data back? And is there a way to manipulate the data? What would be the impact? So there's a difference between only reading or actually taking actions and influencing the machine, which is a totally different story. But so far, nobody has ever question the basic functionality of these platforms. So the focus has always been on the interfaces.
Mm. Okay. In the next question, I have some questions from the audience, but I'll combine that in my next question again. But this one is about Secomea's relevance when OT services are outsourced. We've seen the trend of greater dependency of machine vendor specialists be able to assist. We see that from a lot of large factories, which we have good dialogue with. So what would be the natural that data processing service would also be managed by third parties? One thing is remote access services, but data processing, and what benefits and challenges do you see? And knowing Secomea, where would we fit into this scenario? Everybody's talking about data being your most valuable asset. So I guess that will be outsourced as well, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think this is where Industry 4.0 now becomes really interesting, because we have done a couple of projects where end customers who run a production would ask us, we want to do Industry 4.0 and we want to do predictive maintenance, preferably with artificial intelligence. And then we would go in and we would see, well, there's no way we're going to do predictive maintenance right now or artificial intelligence at this point in time, because first we need a stable process platform that runs stable and robustly, and then we can once we have that and we establish a good data platform, then we can actually do something with the data. And this year it didn't take place, but last year I was at the Hanover trade show, and I went to, I think it was Hall 6, where all the cloud vendors were, and there was tons of little two-man companies that said, we're now bringing all your data into the cloud and just take it to the cloud, and then we have all of our algorithms and we do number crunching. Most were really IT driven and algorithm driven, but had not a really good understanding of the automation world. And I think that is what makes that's what I perceive for Secomea as an opportunity, because it's not just getting raw data from the machine into the cloud and that's it. That's not feasible at all. What's really feasible is taking the data, doing some kind of pre-processing, some kind of sorting, sort the access. Whose data is it? Is it the data of the machine vendor who has machines all over the world, but obviously seen from the end customer, some of these customers that have the same machine are their competitors, obviously. So is it the data of the machine vendor, or is it my data as the end user? And both of them have different targets. And I see a huge opportunity, Peter, with the platform that you have. And I don't think you're there today, but I see that potential of actually sorting that data, creating secure data streams to whatever kind of storage, and then having controlled access. So if Peter, you're the automotive manufacturer, and I supply a machine to you, then we engage in a contract, the two of us, because I say I want to make sure my machines run in an optimized way. And you say, as the manufacturer, I don't want you to understand what my specific production program is every day. So we will agree on a data abstraction, on some aggregation data or aggregation for you and for me. And we will both get the data representation that fulfills our targets and purposes, but actually doesn't reveal the detail of information that would be compromising internal secrets to the other part. And then we engage in a contract and we say, okay, the Secomea tool is a great tool to implement that contract. And that I see a real big opportunity for that. So the controlled, managed data transfer along all these different steps in the value chain.
I'm glad you're saying that, because what we're talking about here in a Secomea context is a data collection module where it can do aggregation and send to multiple clouds, subsets of data, and so on. So at the time we did it, we didn't really have all that feedback, so we were scared that we over-engineered the thing. But it seems like we are on the right path, although still have some things to do. But that's reassuring. We get a couple of questions here along the way, but I think that aligns very well with the last topic I have. Like, will security certifications be decisive for choosing an OT solution? We had a question from Marco here in Italy. Do you believe IEC 62443 will become a must-have compulsory by law for products by safety? So as I indicated here, the clear effect from cybersecurity attacks would be loss of productivity and so on. But do you think a security certified solution such as Secomea or others would make customers focus on downtime and trust that the solution itself will assure the cybersecurity, which goes along with another question, how to protect a production plant during a remote maintenance service windows from threats coming from the maintenance technician PC. I don't know if that's clear enough, but maybe you can unfold this topic. It's really about will the certifications be protection enough?
Well, it's really difficult for me because I cannot give an objective answer, because our company makes a living in doing these certificates. So if we were not convinced that this is a real need in the market, we wouldn't be doing it, because we wouldn't see a future for ourselves. But that being said, so people, I mean, you have to take me as a biased source of that opinion. Yeah. But let me still tell you why I think it's the trend. Because when we work with machine vendors, we actually don't do an IEC 62443 product audit like we would do with Secomea. We do a risk assessment. It's a 2-day workshop, just looking with people from different departments and with different perspectives: product management, development, IT, customer sales, and so on. So we look at this entire security space, and then we come up with a roadmap, a security roadmap for that platform, for that machine, and basically with an action plan. And part of that action plan is that we create a secure communication and IT architecture for that machine or that system. And when we want to fill that with elements, there is 2 ways. One way is everything I take, I basically do a security check and assessment myself, but that's a tremendous piece of work. If a machine builder has to basically do a security assessment for each PLC, for each HMI panel, for each barcode reader, for each drive, that's not possible. So we need some accepted level where we say, okay, if we take components that have been pre-audited, pre-checked, and they achieve IEC 62443 level 2, then we have the assurance that this will fit into our security architecture and model and will not violate that. And with violate is the weakest the weakest link in the chain breaks the entire system. So if you only have one component that is vulnerable and doesn't really support your security concepts, then the entire machine is exposed. So that, it's a level of communication, and we as a company, we test, we do quite a bit of work, quite a bit of effort to show to you as our customers, our clients, Secomea, but also to your customers what we've done, what we've tested. That gives a certain level of assurance.
So this cybersecurity assessment or the certification is one thing. That's a tool, but you have to combine it with an assessment where you say what is the worst thing that can happen, even though you're working with a certified solution. It could be Cisco for that matter. But if it's not implemented correctly, then it could be a danger. So with the question we had from the audience here, Alessandro, how to protect a production plant during a remote maintenance from threat coming from the maintenance technician side. That's more from a product perspective, but I think the risk assessment will reveal what is the worst thing that can happen in case some kind of compromised PC gets access into your environment, right?
I don't have my favorite slide handy right now. I don't want to go looking for it. Also because I'm not running on my production system right now. But that slide of the maintenance technician crawling through the VPN and basically infecting the machine, that is a real threat, and that has happened. And we had a guy in our master of cybersecurity who runs a mineral water filling plant, and they had exactly that happen. WannaCry crawled through the VPN, through the remote maintenance channel, and infected the machine. And this is why I said this is about an end-to-end perspective. Just from using a VPN or a secure technology like the Secomea technology doesn't make the entire system secure by itself. You really have to look at the processes. In that case, it would have been a lot better not to route that VPN traffic through the entire factory, but terminate the VPN at a central point in the factory, and then route the information from there, which is a scenario that Secomea also supports, but it means that the end customer has to take some responsibility. Okay. So it's really something that I think has to work out between end customer and machine vendor. And this is why I do think that security expertise also in coaching and providing guidance is something that, you know, Peter, you and I, as basically we're on the automation component level, we have to do, but also on the machine level. That is an expertise that everybody who builds machines has to provide to their customers and will have to provide, because the machine itself will never be secure, only if it's used in the right way. This is why you need a security manual for whatever you ship to your customers. And this is why you need to look with your customers together jointly at the risk, and both have to take responsibility.
Thanks. We have a question coming in. It's sort of coming in sideways, because it could be a very subjective matter. But I think it's Peter, your opinion about it that really is interesting, because we may have our opinion. From a producer point of view, do you believe it's better to disclose known or reported vulnerabilities on the company website, or keep them secret and fix them silently? I'm saying it because making all those vulnerabilities exposed could be that actually makes someone utilize that vulnerability by actually going out and browsing. Okay, it's that firmware version, so I can attack system having that firmware. So it could be not only a marketing or image thing, but it's also a practicality, a security thing.
This is Marco. Thanks for that question. this is terrific, because it's basically it fits my day, because this morning all I've done this morning was dealing with that specific question. Background is that we were hired by a city in Germany to do a security audit for their traffic light controllers, and when we did that, we found a huge security gap in the traffic light controllers, which in a certain way, it's basically an open debugging port with unsecured root access without password. And there is a way to get physical access to the network, which I don't want to disclose. But basically, we have demonstrated that with little knowledge, it is possible to turn all the traffic lights in that city to red at the same time simultaneously. And it would be, you would have to go physically to each intersection to actually remedy that problem. So it would be a huge traffic jam for probably a couple of days. And we had that discussion with the vendor, because that company who does the controller, and they're a great company, nothing wrong with them, I don't blame them, but they had so far implemented security by obscurity. Our systems are so special. We don't document our network protocols to the public and so on. That is enough. Yet it took our technician half a day to find, with general port scanners, easily accessible tool sets for penetration testing. It took our technician half a day to uncover that well-documented vulnerability. It's not even a secret. It's known. It's a known problem. So I think security by obscurity doesn't work anymore. And we worked with the VDE, in Germany, the Association of Electrical Engineers. They have founded an organization that's called CERT at VDE. So they run a CERT, and that's run basically by a number of automation vendors jointly. They finance that, and we were part of that team. So we worked with them on a responsible disclosure of that information, and we actually, or they and us, we coached the vendor of this traffic controller system to actually go public with that information. And if you look at the CVE database and you look at what Siemens and Rockwell and all the big ones, how many disclosures and vulnerabilities they have published, then you must be doing something wrong if you're not in that
Yes. Yeah.
So I would really advise not to keep it secret, but to be public about that, because we don't have to. There's nobody is to blame for a vulnerability. If you're to blame for something, it's not dealing with the vulnerability. You guys at Secomea have started doing that very early. Not everybody has started early, but it's really important that you face the challenge, and then you might as well be public, go public about that. And I do think it is actually good for your business and not a bad thing if you do that.
Okay. We are approaching the end. There was a comment here in the, I don't know if that was a question from Mr. Shori here or not, but otherwise we are in the Q&A section. The last, okay, it was just a comment. So I don't know if there's anyone else in the audience that has anything on their minds. Okay, then I will allow myself to wrap up, and thank you, Peter, for your time. It can be a very dry topic, and I don't hope in this format that it was too boring. I find it very interesting. There was a couple of things that I had to take with me that I would go and adjust in our approach. But overall, it was so great stuff to get enlightened on your view on this. So thank you, Peter, and we'll work closely in the near future because we have a new major update audit coming up. So we'll talk very soon.
Well, Peter, thank you very much. Dave and Marco, thank you also very much. That it was not boring. That's at least polite of you. No, it's been great fun. Thank you so much, Peter, for inviting me, and thank you to everyone in the audience. You had great questions, and I'm always excited to see that there's people who are interested in getting themselves educated in security, and from the level of questions, it could be seen that you all have dealt with the matter before and are really interested in. So I hope on your quest to securing your products and your systems and your operation, you're going to be successful, and I'll be happy to be in touch at any time. Thank you so much.
Okay, great. Thanks. Have a nice day, everybody.
Thank you.